Let your thoughts slow, and your breath soften, as we drift together into a very old and quiet story. Somewhere beneath the weight of centuries, there is a vault that no living hand has opened. Its walls were laid by hands that moved slowly and deliberately, pressing each stone into mortar mixed with river clay. The craftsman who built it would have known the weight of silence inside such a chamber, the way sound simply stops. For many lifetimes it sat undisturbed, beneath courtyard stones that other feet would walk across without knowing. The civilization that built it rose and fell, and the language of its records slowly drifted from living memory. Scribes had noted its contents once, in careful lines pressed into clay, but those tablets too were sealed away. What was stored inside was considered so valuable that no single name or guard was ever written beside the entrance. Seasons turned above it for centuries, rain pooling in the courtyard cracks, seeds drifting through and taking root in mortar. Eventually the city around it quieted, and the market sounds and evening fires and voices of children all gradually ceased. Sand moved in slowly from the surrounding plains, softening every edge, filling every doorway a little at a time. The vault sat beneath all of that stillness, sealed, as if time itself had simply agreed to wait. Centuries later, travelers passing at dusk would sometimes notice a faint depression in the ground, a place where the earth seemed to settle a little differently. No one stopped to dig, not then, because the shape of buried things can look so much like the ordinary ground. And so the vault remained as it was, holding whatever it held, in a silence that had by then become very deep. The story of what may have been inside has traveled down through incomplete records and careful scholarly reading of very old texts. And tonight, gently, we begin to follow that trail back, one slow step at a time, into the quiet past. Somewhere in the quiet hours before dawn, a city that had never known silence finally grew still. The vaults had been full that evening, stacked with gold bars that caught the lamplight and held it like something alive. Guards had walked their slow rounds through those corridors for decades, and nothing had ever changed. There was a river nearby, and that night its sound carried farther than usual through the open air. The last record shows the gold weighed and catalogued just 3 days before, every piece accounted for and logged. By morning the entries would mean nothing, because by morning the vaults would be empty. No one heard anything, or if they did, they never said. The morning shift arrived as they always did, unhurried, carrying the ordinary habits of ordinary days. The outer door was exactly as it should be, closed and latched, undisturbed in the pale early light. Inside, the silence had a different quality, the particular stillness of a space that holds less than it should. The shelves where the gold had rested were bare, swept nearly clean, as though the weight had simply ceased to exist. A single gold coin had been left behind, or missed, resting in a small crack at the base of the wall. It lay there quietly for years, the only remaining proof that the gold had ever been real at all. The routes out of the city had been watched, or were supposed to have been watched, all of them. And yet something very heavy had moved through the night without waking a single witness. Decades later, investigators would still return to that empty room, drawn back by the sheer implausibility of it. The gold has never been found, and the room simply holds its quiet, the way old stone always does. In the old merchant quarters of medieval Bruges, counting houses stood close together along narrow cobblestone lanes, their candles burning late into the evening. A single tallow candle on a clerk's desk cast a warm, trembling circle of light over columns of handwritten figures, the ink still fresh and gleaming. The counting house was a quiet place by nature, filled only with the soft scratch of quills and the occasional rustle of parchment turning. Here, the wealth of trading empires passed not as gold in hand, but as careful notations in rows, each entry representing ships and spices and distant shores. The great cloth merchants of Bruges kept their records with extraordinary care, each transaction verified by 2 separate clerks before being sealed in wax. Slowly, over generations, These ledger books accumulated into vast archives, rooms lined floor to ceiling with the careful memory of commerce. Outside the counting house windows, the canals of Bruges lay still in the evening, their dark water mirroring the soft glow of lanterns on stone bridges. The canal system was itself a kind of ledger, carrying wealth into and out of the city in the hulls of flat-bottomed barges loaded with wool and Flemish lace. In time, the counting house became the invisible engine of an age, its small candlelit room connecting the trade routes of 3 continents through ink and arithmetic. Far away in Venice and Genoa, similar rooms existed, each one a quiet cell in a vast web of trust that had no center and no single guardian. The figures recorded in those ledgers represented something almost impossible to steal in an obvious way, because the wealth existed only as agreed-upon numbers. And yet, somewhere within those careful columns of figures, a transfer of almost unimaginable scale appears to have taken place, leaving no obvious trace. The clerks who recorded it, if they existed at all, left behind only the faintest of impressions, like the ghost of a pen pressed too lightly on old vellum. Slowly, historians began to notice small inconsistencies in the surviving archive records, gaps where pages had been carefully removed or entries quietly altered. The stone walls of the counting house held no memory of what passed between merchant and clerk in those long candlelit evenings of the trading season. Only the candle would have known, burning steadily through the night as figures moved from one column to another in the careful handwriting of a trusted clerk. And when morning came, the candle would have guttered and gone cold, leaving only the wax and the written page and the long quiet of a Flemish dawn. Deep within the palace, long corridors stretched from one gilded room to the next, carrying only the faint sound of distant footsteps. Word traveled slowly in those days, passed from one servant to another, softened and changed with each quiet retelling. The great treasuries of the empire sat behind heavy doors of iron-banded oak, their locks turned by only a handful of trusted hands. Somewhere in those rooms, behind those doors, lay objects whose value was not measured in gold alone but in the weight of memory and power. Ministers would pass each other in the long halls, exchanging only a glance, a slight nod, a wordless understanding of what they each had seen. The architecture itself seemed to hold secrets in its carved reliefs, in the patterns pressed into plaster that had hardened over centuries. Slowly, accounts began to circulate of objects that had once been catalogued, recorded, placed on inventories that no one could now locate. Some said the loss had happened during a single quiet night, others believed it had unfolded over many years, one small absence at a time. In the eastern wing, a set of rooms that had once held ceremonial objects was now simply still, its shelves showing only faint outlines of where things had rested. The dust there settled differently, in gentle drifts that suggested something had been removed with care, without urgency, without noise. Far away, in the outer provinces, there were rumors, soft ones, the kind that reach a traveler at an inn long after the event itself has passed. Merchants who passed through the capital spoke of certain objects appearing in distant markets, handled by sellers who could not explain their origins. The palace archivists worked quietly at their long tables, searching through ledgers whose ink had grown faint with the passing of decades. Each missing entry in the records pointed somewhere, but the direction shifted depending on who was reading and what they wished to find. In the garden courtyards outside, shallow fountains had long since gone dry, their stone basins collecting only leaves and the silence of abandoned afternoons. The corridors themselves remained, long and cool and quiet, as they had always been, as if the palace simply waited for an answer that had not yet arrived. And somewhere beyond those corridors, beyond the reach of any inventory or archive, the truth of what was taken rested in a stillness all its own. Somewhere in a quiet archive, rows of leather ledgers rest on shelves, their spines worn smooth by generations of careful hands. Each page holds columns of names written in faded ink, the careful script of a clerk who never imagined anyone would still be reading. The names belonged to ordinary people, merchants and farmers, sailors and weavers, each one recorded in a moment of quiet transaction. In time, the people themselves faded from memory, but the ledgers kept their names alive in ink that slowly turned the color of autumn leaves. One particular set of ledgers, discovered in a cool basement room, contained entries that did not match any known record from the same period. The names were written in a slightly different hand, perhaps a second clerk, or someone recording information passed down by word of mouth. Slowly, scholars began to notice that certain names appeared in these ledgers decades before the same names surfaced in other cities far away. A name scratched into one ledger page in a small coastal town would appear again, years later, in records found in a distant inland province. Whether these were the same individuals traveling great distances, or simply the same names passing through different generations, no one could say with certainty. The ledger pages themselves were made from local materials, vegetable tanned leather and pressed reed paper, connecting them to very specific places. Far away, in a museum storage room, a conservator once held a single page up to the light and noticed a faint watermark pressed into the fiber. The watermark resembled a shape that historians had seen before, a small symbol used by a particular guild whose records had otherwise completely disappeared. Gently, the conservator set the page back down, and the watermark faded again into the ordinary cream surface of the paper. In time, other fragments surfaced in different collections, each one carrying a few more names, a few more quiet transactions from an ordinary day. The threads connecting these names across distance and time were too faint to follow with certainty, like a path through tall grass that closes behind you. Slowly, archivists placed the ledgers back on their shelves, each book closed, each name resting quietly in the dark between the covers. And the names remain there still, patient and unhurried, waiting in the faded ink of pages that no longer remember the hands that wrote them. The harbor at dawn holds a particular kind of stillness, when the last fishing lanterns have gone dark and the water lies flat as polished stone. Somewhere out on that water, a vessel that carried something of immense and quiet value had simply passed beyond the reach of ordinary understanding. The dockworkers who arrived that morning found the usual ropes, the usual cleats, the usual smell of salt and old wood, but one berth stood empty. The harbor master's ledger, still open on his desk from the night before, showed the departure time recorded in a careful, unhurried hand. Beyond the breakwater, the sea stretched out in long, slow swells, indifferent to what it had received and chosen not to return. The morning birds moved along the Titeline as they always had, lifting and settling, unbothered and unhurried. In the years that followed, the story of that departure would be told quietly, in harbors not unlike this one, over cups of cold tea going unnoticed. No one had seen anything that could be called unusual, the tide had done what tides do, and the ship had gone with it. At the far end of the quay, a single iron bollard still carries the marks left by ropes that once held something that mattered very much to those who owned it. The stone of the harbor walls, worn smooth by generations of hands and weather, has absorbed so many departures that one more left almost no impression. Somewhere in an archive that smells of dry paper and long-closed windows, a customs form records the last official acknowledgement that anything of significance changed hands. The form is entirely ordinary, filled with entirely ordinary words, and that is perhaps the most disquieting thing about it. By mid-morning the harbor had filled with the sounds and motions of ordinary commerce, and the empty berth was already spoken for by another vessel. The sea, as it always does, settled back into its own rhythms, its long breathing, its slow and patient turning with the moon. Far out where the harbor's influence ends and the open water begins, the swell runs deep and cold and entirely without memory. If you listen on a quiet morning when the wind is low, the harbor itself seems to breathe slowly, as if it too is drifting toward rest. And the story, like the water, moves on in its own time, quietly, without insisting that anyone follow. Somewhere far out on the open ocean, a ship moves slowly through water that has no color at all, only stillness. The sailors aboard such vessels once knew the sea by the feel of the wind changing against their cheeks, long before any instrument could tell them. There is something quietly remarkable about how many ships simply sailed beyond the horizon and did not return, not in storm, not in war, but in ordinary silence. The log books of old port cities are filled with names of ships that were expected back within a season, and whose berths remained empty for years afterward. One such vessel, the Mary Celeste, was found drifting in the Atlantic in 1872, her sails still set, her cargo untouched, her logbook open to a routine entry. The compass in the captain's cabin was still spinning slowly when the crew of the Dei Gratia boarded her, as though the sea itself had just exhaled. The galley stove held remnants of a meal that had been prepared but never eaten, the pots still in place, the cups still set. In the years that followed, investigators returned again and again to the question, and each time the sea offered no answer, only the sound of water against the hull. Far to the north, in the waters between Greenland and Baffin Island, a different kind of silence settled over the Franklin expedition in the winter of 1845. Two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, pressed into the ice and waited for a thaw that took longer than anyone had imagined possible. The ships themselves were found on the seafloor more than a century later, resting in the cold and the quiet as though they had only just come to a slow stop. Divers who descended to the Erebus reported finding plates still stacked in the mess, boots still standing in a cabin, everything in its place beneath the cold water. There is a quality to those images that is hard to name, a kind of preserved ordinariness, as if the ordinary life of the ship had simply continued without the people in it. Other ships vanished without leaving even that much behind, dissolving into the record as a name, a departure date, and a long silence where the return entry should have been. The sea holds what it takes with a patience that has no edge to it, no bottom that anyone has yet reached with their instruments or their questions. And somewhere in that depth, the hulls of those ships rest in the silt, slowly becoming part of the ocean floor, quietly, at the pace that the sea prefers. The ships that never came back did not vanish in drama or in fire, most of them, but simply passed beyond the horizon and kept going, into water that has no end. Somewhere in the old merchant quarter, the morning fog settled low over the rooftops, soft and unhurried, as it had for centuries. The cobblestone lanes grew quiet before sunrise, when only the faintest sounds of the harbor carried up through the stillness. Old warehouses lined the waterfront, their timber frames darkened by years of salt air and slow rain. Inside, bolts of fabric and ceramic jars and sealed crates waited in long rows, patient as stones. The merchants who moved through these corridors carried ledgers, small books with careful handwriting that tracked every coin. Slowly, over many generations, the quarter had grown into a place where nearly everything of value passed through at least once. Gold and silk moved through these narrow streets as quietly as water moves through a mill channel. In the evenings, lanterns hung at intervals along the covered walkways, casting a gentle amber glow on the stones below. Far away, across the water, ships carrying cargo would slow as they approached the harbor mouth, reading the current carefully. The harbor master kept his own records, a second set of accounts written in a different hand from the merchants. In time, those two sets of records began to diverge, quietly, in small numbers at first, and then less quietly. Something had been leaving the quarter without being written down anywhere, moving through the fog before the counting began each day. The gap in the ledgers was discovered not by any official, but by a quiet clerk who simply noticed the numbers did not add up. He set the ledger aside for a moment and looked out at the fog still sitting over the water, and said nothing. The fog that morning was the same fog that had always come in from the sea, slow and gray and without edges. Days passed, and then weeks, and the quarter continued its business as it always had, the same carts, the same routes. And somewhere in the fog, the answer drifted quietly, unhurried, the way all old things drift when there is no one left to call them back. Somewhere in the quiet hours, a door was found closed, its lock untouched, its hinges still and undisturbed. The keys that should have opened it were simply gone, not hidden, not misplaced, just absent from the world. Historians who first examined the room noted how everything else remained exactly as it had been left. A candle had burned down to its base, the wax pooled and hardened in the shape of its own slow melting. Papers on a low table still held the impression of a hand that had once rested there, pressing gently into the dust. Whatever transaction or agreement had taken place here left no record that anyone could read or follow. In time, the room became known by the name of what it lacked rather than what it held. Slowly, scholars began arriving from distant cities, each bringing their own quiet theory about where the keys had gone. One suggested the keys had been taken deliberately, carried away by someone who wished the room to remain sealed. Another thought the keys had simply been lost in the ordinary confusion of a busy and complicated moment. Neither explanation satisfied everyone, and so the room waited through many seasons without resolution. Outside, the landscape changed in the way that landscapes do when many years pass without anyone watching closely. Trees that had been saplings grew tall enough to shade the stone path leading toward the sealed entrance. The iron fittings on the door slowly took on the color of the earth around them, a deep and quiet amber. People who passed by sometimes paused and listened, as if the room itself might eventually offer some explanation. But the room offered nothing beyond its own stillness, which was itself a kind of answer, patient and unhurried. And so it remains, a locked room with no keys, resting quietly at the edge of what anyone has ever been able to know. After the last transaction cleared and the final door swung shut, a particular kind of quiet settled over everything that had once been so carefully arranged. Dust, as it always does, began its slow patient work, drifting down in no particular hurry to rest where hands had once been busy. The shelves themselves were good shelves, built to last, and they would go on standing long after whatever had filled them was gone. There is something almost restful about an empty room that was once full, the way it holds the shape of what it contained without any of the noise. Far away, people who had once walked these aisles carried on with their days, perhaps without ever knowing quite what had slipped away. The inventory, whatever it had been, became a kind of absence, a shape defined only by what was no longer there to touch or count. Slowly, the air inside grew still and warm, the way air does in places where nothing much is asked of it anymore. Outside, the seasons moved at their own unhurried pace, and the building simply absorbed them, the way old structures do. There were records, of a kind, though records have a way of becoming difficult to follow once the people who made them are no longer around to explain them. In a place like this, the question of where things went can hang in the air for a very long time without anyone pressing too hard for an answer. The shelves, bare as they were, still bore the faint marks of what had rested on them, small impressions and worn patches that accumulate over years of use. Someone, at some point, had arranged things here with care, and that care was still legible in the way the shelves were spaced, in the thought that had gone into the construction. In time, stories about the place began to drift through the community the way stories do, growing quieter and more uncertain with each passing year. The dust continued its patient accumulation, indifferent to whatever questions the empty shelves might prompt in someone pausing to look. There is a kind of order in abandonment, a slow symmetry that emerges when nothing is added and nothing is taken, only time passing evenly over everything. Whatever had once filled this place, it had gone somewhere, and somewhere is a very large and quiet territory. And so the shelves stood on, doing what shelves do in the absence of everything else, which is simply to wait, in the way that only patient things can. Somewhere in the quiet middle of this story, there was still one person who remembered how it had all begun. He had been there when the pieces were still whole, when the record still had names and dates written clearly in fresh ink. In the years that followed, he had kept his knowledge quietly, the way old men keep certain memories close without speaking of them often. The city around him had changed slowly, the way all old cities do, new stones laid over old ones, new names painted where older names had been. But the objects themselves, the ones that had disappeared so many years before, those he still carried in careful detail somewhere inside him. He had once walked through the rooms where they were kept, had seen the light fall across them on an ordinary afternoon, not knowing then what would come. There is something strange about being the last one to have seen a thing that the world has since spent decades looking for. The years had moved around him the way rivers move around a stone, quietly and without asking permission. Somewhere in another part of the country, investigators were still writing letters, still asking questions that circled back to where they had begun. And the witness, in his small room, in his quiet life, held the thread of memory that no ledger had quite managed to preserve. There were details he had told to almost no one, not out of secrecy, but because no one had thought to ask the right question. The right questions, it sometimes happens, arrive a little too late, when the voice that could have answered has grown tired of waiting. He passed away in the way that quiet witnesses often do, without announcement, without a headline, in the ordinary middle of an ordinary season. The season itself carried on, as seasons do, the trees continuing their slow work, the light shifting in its usual unhurried way. What he had known moved with him, softly and without drama, into the place where unspoken things eventually go. The investigators would learn of his passing some weeks later, in a letter written by someone who had not understood its significance. And the trail, which had been growing slowly cooler for years, grew a little cooler still, and the search continued its patient, unhurried drift. November rain fell slowly on the old cobblestones, the stones worn smooth by centuries of quiet footsteps and patient weather. In the dim hours before the city stirred, those streets held a particular stillness, as though the rain itself were listening. The buildings along those lanes were old enough to remember the original event, their facades unchanged through many long winters. Somewhere in the archive records of that era, clerks had written careful entries in their ledgers, columns of numbers that no longer added up. The amounts recorded were immense, the kind of sums that moved slowly between vaults in heavy wooden crates, under escort, through rainy nights. Those crates traveled roads much like these ones, wheels turning quietly over wet stone, the horses patient in the cold. The transfer was routine, or so the record suggested, signed by officials whose names are still legible in the faded ink. And then the trail simply grew quiet, the way a stream sometimes vanishes beneath a field and does not reappear. Investigators who came later found only those same cobblestones, the same rain, the same ledger entries that stopped without explanation. There were no signs of struggle, no broken locks, no witnesses who came forward in the weeks that followed. The cobblestones outside the old repository still carry that same gray quiet they held on the morning the ledgers went silent. Rain has a way of erasing the finer impressions left by wheels and boots, softening everything back to its older shape. The archivists who catalogued the original records worked by lamplight in rooms that smelled of old paper and cold stone. They noted every discrepancy carefully, in the same unhurried script that fills page after page of the surviving files. Outside those archive windows, November would have been doing what it always does, settling a gray calm over the rooftops and the lanes. The stone buildings absorbed that moisture into their walls the way they have absorbed everything else that passed through the centuries. And the cobblestones remain there still, patient and damp, holding whatever weight of history rests quietly upon them. Somewhere in a quiet room, a coat had been laid across the back of a chair, as if its owner had only stepped away for a moment. The fabric still held the shape of shoulders, and the sleeves fell naturally, as though time had simply paused in that small corner of the room. This was not the first thing investigators noticed when they arrived, but it was the detail that stayed with them longest, quietly. A coat left on a chair carries within it a small and particular kind of stillness, the stillness of intention interrupted. Whoever placed it there had meant to return, had imagined a future that included picking it up again and putting it on. In investigations of great vanishings and disappearances, the smallest objects often speak the most quietly and the most clearly. The coat was not hurriedly discarded, not thrown, not crumpled, but placed with a kind of care that suggests the owner expected to return. Perhaps it was a warm afternoon, and the coat had simply become unnecessary for a little while. Or perhaps something called the owner away so gently, so gradually, that leaving the coat behind felt like nothing at all. These are the kinds of details that investigators and historians return to again and again, not because they yield answers, but because they feel true. A coat on a chair is a kind of punctuation, a pause mid-sentence, a thought that drifts off before it reaches its period. And so the chair sat, and the coat rested across it, and the room around them held its breath in the particular way that rooms do when something is missing. Rooms without people acquire a certain patience, as though they are accustomed to waiting, as though they know that people tend to come back. But sometimes, of course, they do not. And the coat remains, patient and unclaimed, holding the shape of an ordinary afternoon that became, in time, something else entirely. Somewhere, far away in time, there is a room where someone once paused, slipped off a coat, and laid it gently across a chair. And in that small, unhurried gesture, without knowing it, they left behind the gentlest and most enduring of clues. Somewhere in a quiet archive, a leather-bound ledger still holds the last words written before everything changed. The ink on that final entry had barely dried when the doors were sealed and the counting stopped. It was an ordinary morning, by all accounts, the kind where no one thinks to mark the hour or remember the light. The clerks had arrived, as they always did, and settled into their familiar chairs at their familiar desks. Columns of figures filled the pages as they had for decades, patient, methodical, unhurried. Outside, the city moved slowly around the building, unaware that inside something vast was being quietly tallied for the very last time. No one has ever been certain which hand wrote the closing line, or whether that person understood what they were writing. In time, scholars would study that final page with the same stillness one brings to a last letter found in an old house. The ledger records a number, and then the line below it is simply empty, as though someone meant to return. That emptiness has a particular quality, like a sentence left mid-breath, trailing off into the quiet of a very old room. Far away, in the same season, the objects being recorded were already beginning their long and silent journey elsewhere. Slowly, the trail that might have led anyone back to them grew faint, the way a path through tall grass softens after rain. The archive itself still stands, its stone walls holding whatever silence has gathered there across the years. On certain mornings, light falls at an angle through a high window, crossing the shelf where the ledger was kept. The ledger is still there, or one very much like it, resting in the same careful order it was placed in long ago. In the gentle way of very old things, it holds its answer without urgency, as though it has learned to be patient. And so the ink remains, just as it was left, unhurried, unresolved, quietly waiting on the page. Somewhere in the city, long after the crowds have gone, an archive stands in quiet darkness, its lanterns casting a slow amber glow across rows of folded documents. The shelves hold ledgers from another century, their spines worn smooth by hands that once reached for them every ordinary morning. Each folder was placed here with care, the paper inside still carrying the faint impression of a pen pressed in haste or patience, no one can say which. In time, the lanterns in this room became the only witness to what had been gathered here across decades of careful record-keeping. There were maps among the papers, large ones, folded so many times that the creases had begun to soften the coastlines they once drew so precisely. Slowly, the story of the theft began not in a courtroom or a newspaper, but here, in the patient accumulation of small receipts and careful inventories. A record exists of a shipment, dated simply with a season and a year, the handwriting unhurried, the ink now a gentle brown like autumn leaves pressed flat. Somewhere far away, the objects named in that record had already begun their long and quiet journey to a place no one had yet imagined. The archivist who first noticed the discrepancy left no dramatic note, only a small mark in the margin, a faint line drawn beside a number that did not match. That small mark sat unread for years, the lantern swaying gently above it through many quiet winters, the papers undisturbed. In this kind of place, time moves differently, measured not in hours but in the slow yellowing of paper and the gradual fading of ink. The objects themselves, wherever they had gone, carried no awareness of being missing, resting in whatever room or crate or shelf had received them. Archivists in quiet cities have a saying that nothing is truly lost until the last copy of its name is lost as well. And so the name survived here, in the archive, in the patient handwriting of someone who recorded everything without knowing which line would one day matter most. The lanterns would be lit again each evening, their glow falling across the same shelves, the same rows of folders, the same unanswered questions folded quietly inside. In time, a researcher would come, drawn by a thread of curiosity rather than urgency, and would sit in this room and begin to read. And in the silence of that archive, with the lantern swaying slowly overhead, the story would begin to breathe again, quietly, without hurry. Somewhere in the quiet hours of history, a map was folded carefully and placed inside a leather satchel, and it was never opened again. These maps were not simply drawings on paper, they were the accumulated memory of sailors, traders, and wanderers who had spent their lives learning the shape of the world. Each careful line on those old charts represented a voyage someone had made, a shore someone had reached through fog and patience and long, open water. In the great libraries and archives of the 15th century, rooms held collections of these charts, organized slowly and tended by scholars who understood their quiet value. Some of those rooms still stand today, their ceilings vaulted and pale, their shelves holding only the maps that remained. The ones that did not remain are harder to trace, gone not with fire or water, but simply gone, folded away and carried somewhere the record could no longer follow. One of the most quietly astonishing losses was a chart said to have mapped regions of the Southern Ocean long before any official voyage had reached them. It passed through perhaps 4 or 5 sets of hands over a century, merchants, a bishop, a minor official of a trading city, and then the record simply stops. There is something gently strange about a thing that moves through time, touching different lives, and then becomes still in a way that no one notices until much later. Cartographers of that era often worked alone, by lamplight, tracing the descriptions sailors gave them into clean, steady lines on animal skin or mulberry paper. The Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513, still exists, held now in a cool museum room in Istanbul, but it mentions earlier source maps that no one has ever found. Those source maps, whatever they were, have not been seen in 5 centuries, folded somewhere into the long patience of time. In Venice, a scriptorium once held one of the largest map collections in Europe, and the inventory taken in 1499 lists several charts that appear in no later document. The building that housed them still stands near the Rialto, its walls the same pale stone, the canal below it moving slowly as it always has. It is possible to stand there now, in the ordinary quiet of a weekday afternoon, and look at those walls and wonder what was once carried through the door. Maps folded and never returned have a kind of stillness to them, not lost exactly, but resting somewhere outside the reach of any current hand. Somewhere they may still hold their lines intact, the coastlines drawn with care still curving across the skin or paper, patient and unhurried and waiting in the quiet. The Treasury Hall had stood for generations, its stone floors worn smooth by the footsteps of those who once kept careful watch over what was held inside. There is something very still about an empty room that was once full of purpose, the way silence settles into corners and rests there, unhurried. Historians who have studied this place describe the hall as austere, almost plain, built not for beauty but for safekeeping. The walls were thick, deliberate, the kind of construction that says quietly that whatever lives inside this room is meant to endure. Records from the period describe an inventory so vast that scribes worked by lamplight through the cooler months just to account for what was there. Gold, silver, and objects of worked copper were catalogued in columns of careful script, each line a small act of faith that these things would remain. And then, slowly, the records stop, not with any dramatic announcement, but simply with a quietness that the pages themselves seem to carry. Scholars who first noticed this gap in the archive described it the way one might describe arriving at a familiar door and finding it simply no longer there. The Treasury Hall itself still stands today, or what remains of it, stone upon stone, the ceiling long since open to the sky. When the sun is low and the light comes in at a shallow angle, the shadows of the old wall niches fall across the floor in long, quiet lines. Those niches are where the objects would have rested, set into the walls with a care that suggests they were expected to stay for a very long time. What filled them, exactly, is still a matter of quiet scholarly disagreement, the details shifting slightly with each new reading of the old accounts. Some accounts speak of ceremonial vessels, others of worked stone seals, and some describe objects whose purpose no one now fully understands. There is a particular comfort in things whose meaning has been gently lost to time, because they ask nothing of us, only that we look at them quietly. The hall was last described as full in one document, and next described, many years later, as a place of echoes, without further explanation. In time, the surrounding city grew quieter too, its streets narrowing as buildings were taken apart stone by stone for other uses elsewhere. And the Treasury Hall remained, open now to wind and light and the slow passage of seasons, holding its silence the way old rooms do, gently and without complaint. Somewhere beneath the old trade routes, the ocean floor holds the quiet memory of fortunes that once moved slowly across the water. Silver, in those centuries, was the language the world spoke, weighed carefully, passed from hand to hand, loaded onto ships in the gray hours before dawn. The ships themselves were heavy things, sitting low in the water, their holds packed with chests that creaked softly as the vessel moved. Slowly, over years and decades, ledgers were kept, numbers written in faded ink that tried to account for every bar, every coin, every ingot. And yet, when the tallies were finally compared, something enormous was simply not there. The weight of it, when scholars tried to calculate what had gone missing, came to figures that were almost too large to hold in the mind. Thousands of tons of refined silver, ore, and coin, recorded in manifests that now rest in Spanish and Portuguese archives, simply never arrived. In time, historians began tracing the routes, the slow paths across the Atlantic, the overland passages through mountain and jungle and high cold plain. The silver came, originally, from places that had taken millions of years to form it, veins pressed deep into rock at Potosi, the mountain that shone. At its height, the mine breathed a kind of smoke and dust that drifted across the high plains for miles, visible from a great distance in the clear air. Far away, in the mints of Potosi and Lima, molten silver was poured into molds, stamped, and stacked, a slow and methodical rhythm that went on for generations. Each piece of 8 that left those rooms carried with it a small and invisible record, a date, a mint mark, a weight, breadcrumbs across centuries. And the ships that carried them sailed slowly through water that was sometimes very still, and sometimes not still at all. Some of those vessels never completed the crossing, lost to storms, to shallows, to events that left only scattered timber and silence. The silver that went down with them still rests there, slowly being absorbed into the reef, into the sand, into the unhurried world beneath the surface. And yet the larger disappearance, the portion that never boarded a ship at all, or left quietly through unofficial hands, remains the quieter question. The weight of vanished silver presses gently on the historical record, not as a drama, but as a soft and enduring absence, like something set down and simply not picked up again. Somewhere in the stillness of a great museum, long after the visitors have gone, the pedestals stand empty in the pale light. The marble is cold to the touch, and the silence around each vacant plinth is a particular kind of quiet that only absence can create. Once, these pedestals held things of extraordinary weight and beauty, carved from stone pulled from quarries that no longer exist. The hands that shaped them moved slowly and with great care, over years that we can now only imagine from the faint marks they left behind. In time, the objects were moved, and the pedestals were left, and the rooms around them slowly filled with a different kind of air. Far away, across the grey water of the Aegean, the city of Athens still holds the hill where much of this story began. The Parthenon sits there still, its columns the color of warm honey in the afternoon, its open sky framing where friezes once rested. Along the upper band of the building, where sculpted marble once ran in a long continuous procession, there are now only gaps and pale stone edges. The procession that once moved in carved stone around all four sides of the temple depicted horses and riders and people carrying vessels. Some of those panels are in London now, in a building called the British Museum, resting in a long hall of pale artificial light. They arrived in London in the early years of the 19th century, carried on ships from Athens by a Scottish nobleman named Lord Elgin. He had received a document, a piece of paper from the Ottoman authorities who then governed Greece, permitting him to work at the Acropolis. What that document permitted, exactly, has been a matter of quiet disagreement ever since, read differently by different careful readers. The sculptors left Athens on boats and crossed the Mediterranean slowly, some of them lost when one ship sank near the Greek island of Kythera. The pieces that sank rested on the seafloor for 2 years before divers retrieved them, a little weathered by the salt and the stillness. In Athens, the Acropolis Museum opened in the years since, built with large windows so that visitors can see the hill itself through the glass as they look at the casts. The empty pedestals on the hill and the filled ones in London rest quietly in their separate rooms, and the marble between them is the same pale stone. Somewhere beneath the long silence of an afternoon, a river moves without hurry through land that has kept its secrets for many centuries. The water carries only what the rain has given it, smooth stones and fallen leaves, drifting without any particular destination. Along those banks, long ago, people built walls of cut stone, and those walls still stand in places, worn smooth by seasons no one counted. The stones were fitted together without mortar, each one chosen carefully, and that patience is still visible if you look closely enough. Historians have walked these riverbanks for generations, reading the land the way a patient person reads an old letter, slowly and without rushing to the end. What drew people here in the first place was perhaps simply the water, steady and unhurried, available through every dry season and every long winter. The river does not know what was taken, or when, or by whom, and it moves through the years as it always has, indifferent and patient. Far upstream, the source is a quiet spring in high ground, trickling out from between mossy rocks as it has for longer than any record survives. That spring feeds into a stream, the stream into a broader channel, and the channel into the river that eventually reaches the place where so much once happened. People who lived near this river built not only with stone but with memory, passing down in quiet voices what they had seen and what they had heard from those before them. Some of that memory found its way into written form, pressed into clay or traced onto prepared surfaces that survived in fragments and partial passages. The fragments do not tell a complete story, and perhaps they were never meant to, recording only what seemed worth recording on an ordinary afternoon long past. What remains missing from those records is itself a kind of presence, a shape defined by its own absence, felt rather than read. Archaeologists have measured the spaces where things once rested and drawn careful conclusions about the weight and dimension of what is no longer there. The river beside all this continues without comment, as rivers tend to do, carrying sediment and cold air and the occasional feather from a passing bird. In the late afternoon, when the light falls at a low angle across the water, the surface seems almost to hold still for a moment before the current reasserts itself. And somewhere in that stillness, unhurried and unresolved, the question rests quietly, neither answered nor entirely lost, simply carried along with everything else the river holds. Somewhere beyond the last lit village, a narrow road wound through pine forest, disappearing quietly into the night. The border itself was little more than a rusted gate and a wooden guardhouse, its windows fogged with cold breath from inside. On certain nights, the guards on both sides would let their lanterns burn low, and the dark between them would grow very wide. It was through gaps like these that objects moved quietly across countries, carried by ordinary hands in the hours before dawn. A wooden crate, wrapped in oilcloth, might rest in the back of a cart beside sacks of grain, unremarkable to anyone who passed. The pieces that went missing from collections across Europe traveled this way, slowly and without ceremony, from one set of hands to another. Historians who later retraced these routes found them winding through 4 countries, crossing rivers at unmarked fords and mountain passes without names. Each crossing left almost no record, only a few lines in a local ledger, a name that did not match any known collector. The name appeared 3 times across different border logs, always traveling east, always at an hour when paperwork was lightest. No photograph of this person was ever confirmed, and the single physical description that survived was gentle and forgettable. The trail grows quiet here, like a stream that sinks into limestone and simply continues somewhere underground, unseen. Far to the east, a private collection was catalogued in the 1930s, and the list included several items whose earlier provenance was simply blank. They sat in rooms that few people visited, in a house that had once been full of music and then, after certain years, was not. What happened to those rooms, and what sat inside them, is a question that archivists have held very gently for a long time. Some of the objects may still exist somewhere, resting in places where they are simply not known to be what they are. They might sit in a back room, or a farmhouse attic, or behind glass in a collection whose records go back only so far and no further. And so the chapter closes here, not with an answer, but with the image of a road in early morning, running between 2 countries, quiet and patient. In old bank vaults, the heaviest doors in the world were designed to seal shut with the gentlest turning of a single handle. And yet, across many of the greatest thefts ever recorded, investigators arrived to find those doors resting just slightly open. Not forced, not broken, simply, resting ajar, as if someone had passed through and forgotten to press them closed behind. The detail has come up quietly in archives from Vienna, from Buenos Aires, from a small coastal city in Belgium whose name most people have long forgotten. In each case the safe had been opened correctly, with the proper combination, by someone who understood the mechanism from the inside. Locksmiths who examined these doors afterward noted that nothing had been stressed, nothing scratched, nothing left even slightly out of alignment. The bolts had simply withdrawn, smoothly and quietly, and then the door had swung on its great hinges and stood open in the still air. What was taken, in these incidents, was almost never everything, and that is the part that has puzzled researchers most quietly over the years. Certain items, sometimes a single sealed envelope or a particular ledger, were lifted, and everything else was left undisturbed. The remaining contents were sometimes even rearranged, gently, as if the person had taken care not to leave disorder behind them. There is something in that care, in that unhurried tidiness, that sits differently than ordinary theft, and has never quite been explained. One archivist in Brussels, writing in a quiet report in the early 1900s, used the phrase, as though time had been suspended in that room. She meant it practically. There was simply no evidence of motion, of hurry, of any kind of disturbance at all. Detectives of that era had no framework for a theft so patient, so precise, so entirely free of the expected marks of crime. And so the cases were filed, carefully, as these things always were, and the doors, once re-examined, were simply closed again. The vaults were returned to service, the combination sometimes changed, sometimes not, and the particular silence of each incident settled slowly over the years. And somewhere in the long wait of those closed files, the doors still hang, just slightly open, in the imagination of the few who have read them. Long before coins were minted, people pressed symbols into soft clay and called that weight a promise. In the valleys between two slow rivers, the first currencies were simply measures of grain, held in common storehouses. Those storehouses still stand in places, their mud brick walls worn smooth by centuries of wind and quiet rain. Slowly, empires learned that a small disk of silver could carry the authority of an entire civilization in one closed hand. The Lydian kingdom, settled among gentle hills in what is now western Turkey, was among the first to stamp electrum into coins. Each coin carried the image of a lion, pressed lightly, as if the animal were simply resting there in the metal. Far to the east, the Persian Empire used a gold coin called the dairik, bearing the image of a running archer. Those coins traveled enormous distances, passing through dozens of hands across mountains and deserts and slow wide rivers. In time, whole empires faded, and their currencies outlasted them, washing up in distant lands no emperor ever visited. The Carthaginian Empire struck coins in bronze and gold, each one inscribed in a script that very few people can now read. Their trading ports once stretched across the whole of the Mediterranean, carried on that warm, unhurried inland sea. When Carthage fell, the coins did not disappear, they simply continued their slow drift through other hands, other centuries. Archaeologists still find Carthaginian coins along the coast of Spain and deep in the soil of Sardinia. Each small disc is a quiet record of a journey no one living can fully retrace or explain. Somewhere beneath the ground of North Africa, vaults of currency from forgotten treasuries may still wait undisturbed. The empires that minted them are gone, and yet the metal endures, patient and still, holding its shape across the centuries. And somewhere in that long, quiet persistence of metal and symbol, a kind of meaning continues to rest, unhurried, unresolved. Somewhere in the long chain of hands that moved the stolen goods, someone had the idea of hiding everything in plain sight. Wooden crates, heavy and ordinary, stenciled with addresses and stamped with the names of legitimate dealers, moved slowly through checkpoints without a second glance. It is a quiet kind of genius, really, to make the extraordinary look like something no one would bother to open. The crates themselves were real enough, sometimes packed with straw, sometimes with sawdust, sometimes with genuine goods layered carefully on top. Anyone lifting the lid would see exactly what the paperwork described, and then close it again and move on. The paperwork itself traveled with the crates, folded neatly inside oilskin pouches, stamped by offices that no longer existed. Somewhere along the route, the crates would be quietly redirected, loaded onto a different cart, sent down a road that did not appear on any manifest. The men who moved them were paid to ask no questions, and most of them never did. In the slow rhythm of trade, one crate looks very much like another, and a long convoy of them becomes almost invisible through sheer repetition. There is something almost restful about the image, if you did not know what was inside. The goods passed through toll gates and river crossings, each checkpoint adding another layer of legitimacy to their false story. By the time anyone thought to ask where a particular crate had gone, it was already far away, in a different city, in a different building. Warehouses at the edge of port cities were especially useful, large enough to receive shipments without inspection, close enough to the water for a quick departure. The harbor itself was always busy, always loud with the sound of ropes and gulls and water against hulls, a kind of noise that covers many quieter sounds. In time, the crates would be broken apart, the wood burned or reused, and the contents dispersed so thoroughly that no single thread led anywhere. What made this theft so enduring was not the scale of it, but the patience, the willingness to move slowly and let time do its work. And so the crates, marked for delivery, delivered something no manifest ever named, and then simply disappeared into the ordinary world. Somewhere in the long paper trail of history, there is a name that simply does not appear where it should. Not erased, not hidden deliberately, just quietly absent, the way a single thread missing from cloth leaves a gap you only notice slowly. The records from that period are extensive in some ways, written on vellum and clay and pressed papyrus that survived centuries remarkably well. Merchants recorded weights and distances, administrators noted grain stores, scribes copied names of officials into columns that still exist today. And yet within all of that careful documentation, one name that should appear again and again is simply not there. Historians who have spent years with these documents describe the feeling as searching a familiar room and finding one chair always missing. The surrounding names are there, dated and cross-referenced, placed in their proper sequence across dozens of separate sources. But this one slips between them, present in the events themselves, implied by what happened, yet never named in the ink that recorded it. Some scholars have suggested the omission was administrative, a simple clerical gap that later copies never filled in. Others have noted that this particular period saw transitions in record-keeping, when old systems gave way to new ones and certain names simply fell through. There are places in the archaeological record where the absence itself leaves a kind of shape, the outline of something that was there. A courtyard whose function is clear from its layout, a chamber whose fittings are still in the walls, an office whose seal press remains but whose owner is unnamed. The seal press is a particularly quiet detail, a tool designed entirely to leave a record, sitting now in silence without the name it once announced. In the slow accumulation of years, the surrounding records have been cross-checked and confirmed many times, but this gap has remained consistently, gently there. There is something quietly remarkable about a mystery that lives not in what was destroyed but in what was simply never written down. The world around that absence continued, seasons passed, the buildings were used, the trade routes carried their goods onward through the years. And somewhere at the edge of all that activity, a name that once meant something to someone drifted quietly out of the record, unheld. The old auction house stands at the edge of the city, its pale stone steps worn smooth by a century of quiet footfall. Tonight the moon has risen early, casting a long silver path across those steps and onto the cobblestones below. The building has been locked since the evening sale ended, and the last of the catalogs rest in a neat pile inside the glass door. Somewhere in that building, behind a numbered lot card, the provenance of a single object trails back through centuries and continents. It began, as so many of these stories do, in a place far from here, a palace, a war, a long and uncertain journey by road. The object passed through hands that left no record, crossing borders in the back of carts and later in the holds of ships. By the time it arrived in this city, it carried no papers, only the faint scratches of travel on its surface. The auction house received it quietly, as they receive most things, with a measured description and a careful estimate. Bidders came from several countries that afternoon, some by telephone, some seated in the long rows of padded chairs. The hammer fell quickly, and the number spoken aloud that day was one that few in the room had expected. And yet, within the week, questions began to surface, not from the auction house, but from a researcher working in a quiet archive. She had been tracing a different thread entirely, a missing inventory from a collection dispersed after a war, when a description matched. The match was not certain. It rarely is with objects that have traveled so far and left so little behind them. Outside, the auction house steps hold the moonlight evenly, neither offering answers nor taking them away. The stone itself is older than the building, quarried from a region that no longer has the same name it carried then. Somewhere in a filing cabinet, the lot paperwork waits, the estimate, the buyer's number, the brief and careful description. The moon moves slowly across the steps, and the city settles into the deep quiet of the late hour, unhurried and still. Somewhere in a quiet archive, a drawer holds papers that once meant everything to someone, though no one comes to claim them now. These are certificates of ownership, written in careful ink, stamped with seals, signed by hands long still. They name ships, and cargoes, and routes across open water, and the men who believed those things belonged to them. But ownership, it turns out, is a quieter thing than it appears, a word written on paper, nothing more, nothing less. The ships those certificates described have drifted far beyond the reach of any seal or signature. Some were taken in the night, their lanterns dark, their anchors lifted without ceremony, without sound. Others simply vanished into fog that rolled in from the north, as fog does, slowly and without announcement. The certificates remained, growing softer at the edges, collecting the particular silence of things no longer needed. There is something gently strange about a deed to a ship that no longer floats anywhere men can reach. The ink remains, the seal remains, the name of the vessel remains, but the vessel itself has gone somewhere else entirely. Scholars who spend their quiet days with such papers sometimes pause over a single page for a very long time. They are not sure, even now, who the last true owner was, because ownership moves in ways that paper cannot always follow. A cargo changes hands on open water, and the sea does not keep receipts, and the wind does not witness. What remains is only this: a drawer full of paper claims, each one sincere, each one incomplete. In time, the archives themselves grew quiet around those certificates, the way all rooms grow quiet when their purpose has passed. The names on those pages belong to a world that moved on without leaving a forwarding address, and that is all right. Somewhere beneath all of that careful ink, the real story rests quietly, unhurried, waiting without any need to be found. Some things slip away so gradually that no single moment marks their disappearance, only a quiet absence where presence once was. The great caravans that once crossed the Silk Roads carried more than silk. They carried lacquered boxes, sealed correspondence, objects whose origins no one recorded. A bronze vessel might travel from a workshop in one empire through a dozen hands before resting in a tomb no cartographer ever marked. Slowly, the records that might have traced its path faded, the merchants who handled it grew old, the ports where it docked were swallowed by later cities. There is a kind of object that exists outside every ledger, passed hand to hand, unnamed, its story carried only in the memory of people long since gone. In time, these things arrive somewhere unexpected, a monastery storeroom, a harbor warehouse, a palace treasury, and no one recalls how they came to be there. The journey of such things leaves almost no trace, only the object itself, resting quietly, holding within it distances and years it cannot speak. Far away from where it began, a carved ivory piece from one continent might spend centuries within a collection assembled on another shore entirely. The sea carried much of what moved between the ancient world's great centers, quietly, without announcement, in the holds of ships whose names we have mostly lost. Some of those ships reached their destinations and some did not, and the cargoes of the ones that did not simply became part of the ocean floor. Slowly the sediment settled over them, and the sea smoothed its surface, and there was nothing left visible to suggest what rested below. In time, things on such journeys pass through so many contexts that the original meaning of an object becomes entirely separated from the object itself. A ceremonial mask, made for one ritual in one place, might eventually stand in a room where no one knows what ceremony it once attended. The things that traveled farthest are often the things we understand least. They outlasted the explanations that once accompanied them. There is something restful in that, in knowing that some journeys simply exceed the reach of any record, and the object arrives alone, without its story. Somewhere, at this very hour, something ancient rests in a place it was never meant to reach, its long journey finally, quietly, over. And the world moves slowly around it, unhurried, the way the world always has, indifferent to where things began and unconcerned with where they end. Somewhere beneath the old city, workers once carried heavy crates down narrow stone steps into rooms that no map had ever named. The crates were sealed with iron bands, and the men who lowered them into the earth did not speak of what was inside. In those years, great quantities of looted wealth moved quietly through cities, passing from hand to hand before disappearing altogether from the written record. Historians have traced some shipments as far as a certain cellar district, and there the trail goes quiet, as gently as a river slowing before it meets a lake. The district still stands today, its low doorways and thick walls unchanged since the century when the crates arrived. You can walk those streets now and feel how the stone holds the cold of centuries, each block fitted so closely to the next that no light passes between them. Some cellars were bricked over after the war, their entrances sealed so smoothly that a passing eye would never find them. The people who sealed them are long gone, and the knowledge they carried passed with them, slowly, the way a candle flame settles before it goes out. Archivists working in dusty reading rooms have found partial lists, shipping ledgers with entries that end mid-sentence, ink fading at the edges of the page. One ledger records a delivery of 40 crates to a location described only as the lower district, with no street name and no date of retrieval. And so the crates remain, in the imagination at least, sitting quietly somewhere beneath the city, undisturbed by all the decades that have passed above them. There is something restful in the thought of objects resting so long in the same cool darkness, untouched, unhurried. Cities breathe and shift above them, seasons pass, and still the crates wait in the same silence where they were placed. Researchers working in the region have noted that the soil in certain blocks shows signs of older, deeper construction beneath the existing foundations. Ground surveys have mapped hollow spaces below certain streets, spaces that correspond roughly to the old district described in the ledgers. Whether those spaces still hold anything, or whether they were emptied long ago by hands unknown, is a question that rests quietly, unanswered. And perhaps that is enough, to know that somewhere beneath the old streets, the earth keeps its own slow record of what passed through it. Somewhere in the quiet hours before dawn, two men sat across a small table in a room lit only by a single oil lamp. The lamp's flame barely moved, steady and low, casting long gentle shadows across old maps spread between them. Outside, the city was still, the kind of stillness that only comes long after midnight when even the last footsteps have faded. One man extended his hand slowly across the table, and the other took it, and for a moment neither of them spoke. What passed between them in that handshake has never been fully recorded, only guessed at from the letters that came after. The letters themselves were careful, written in the measured language of men who knew that words could outlast their authors. Historians have held those letters for a long time now, reading them in bright reading rooms far from the lamplit room where they began. And still the letters give up only so much, keeping the rest folded inside their careful sentences like a secret inside a closed hand. The room itself no longer exists in the form it had that night, the building altered over the years, the table gone, the lamp long extinguished. Yet the agreement that was made there went on to shape events that rippled outward for decades, quietly and without ceremony. In the days that followed, certain objects began to move, carried in quiet conveyances along roads that most travelers never used. They moved without announcement, wrapped in cloth, placed in ordinary-looking containers that drew no attention at the crossroads. The men who carried them knew only part of what they carried, instructed to deliver and ask nothing further. This was a time when great quantities of wealth could disappear not through force but simply through silence and careful arrangement. The handshake in the lamplit room was perhaps the most important moment in a very long chain, a hinge on which much else quietly turned. And because it happened in private, in a room without witnesses other than the two men themselves, it left almost nothing behind. Only the lamp's faint memory, if even that, lingering somewhere in the deep architecture of a night that has long since passed into morning.